What is going on? Tim. Tim! Will you talk to me? What is in the envelope? Timothy! You're freaking me out. What's going on? Tim! Euro bonds?
$3 million worth. Just like cash. Completely untraceable.
I take it you didn't get a raise.
Barry, it is such a pleasure to have a chance to chat with you today. You are a highly regarded producer and manager and considered a good friend to many, many people. Let's start at the beginning. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Born in London, in the East End. I found out later in life that actually I was born in the saloon bar of a pub.
How nice.
My mother stopped for a Guinness on her way to the maternity hospital, and I arrived, so that was how it all began, and didn't end there, thank God.
What was your childhood like?
It was strange. My father was a waiter, and then as he got on and got a little bit of success, he opened a coffee bar. And above the coffee bar, it's like a 6-room hotel near Victoria Station. Actually, It was quite an interesting place because I realized afterwards it was an English equivalent of a brothel. Now, by that, he didn't have regular young ladies, but in those days, they called it going case because to be respectable, the girls carried a suitcase with them. So they'd come in and stay the nights with their sort of gentleman callers.
So would they rent by the hour?
I'm not, actually, I wasn't sure.
You never got into the business
I never got into the business side of that. And, but it was very interesting because I learned about it because Michael Caine was the night porter.
Really?
And that's when I first met Michael.
Well, that's 6 degrees of separation.
Yes, I mean, and when I read his biography, I realized, because I thought, who are all these men and women? And in those days, a lot of American soldiers. And I thought, they don't sleep very much. So that's how I was.
They're a very busy group.
Yes,
somehow.
yes, very energetic.
What sort of child were you? What were you outgoing? Were you shy?
I honestly can't answer that. I think I was irritating.
You were typical then?
Yes, yeah, I've sustained the irritation. Didn't have many friends. I think I realized very early on I didn't quite fit in.
Right.
And I realized quite early on it was because I was gay.
Was it real early?
Well, my first crush was Brian Ryder. So it was I would say about 8 or 9. And as I realized, I never really came out, I was born out. When the doctor slapped my ass, I asked him for a date. I mean, it's the obvious thing to do. And no, that was never a problem. But I think living in London, the advantage was around the West End and Victoria, you could find places to escape. I got kicked out of school when I was about 13 and a half, quite appropriately. I was caught having sex with somebody by the headmaster. But rather than just getting kicked out, expelled, he also threatened to have me put in prison. So that was the first time I left home.
So this was illegal?
It was illegal. So I hung about on the streets, and it really got me involved in theatre, because in those days the audience would come out on the first interval and then just all walk back. So I'd walk back with them. I saw almost every play in London dozens of times. In time, got to know the sort of ushers and usherettes, and that was my secret life in theatre.
Now, as you got kicked out of school and started to be involved in this world, what was your relationship with your parents? Did you still see them, or did you live at home at that point, or were you out on your own?
In and out. Long periods on my own, on the streets. And then I would go back, then I'd leave again. They weren't bad people, it was just a different time, and they were of their time.
Did they recognize that you were gay at that point? Or?
When I was 38, I had my first meal with my father alone at a restaurant here in Los Angeles called Mar Maison, and the waiter was a little swishy. My father commented on him being being gay, and I said, well, Dad, do you know I am? And he got all embarrassed and said, well, yes. And I said, have you always known? And he said, well, yes. And I was a little upset, but I thought, too late to be upset. That,
Right.
You know, and so my first question was, does Mum know? And my father looked at me and said, Barry, your mum's so dumb, she thinks VD is a hairspray. So she doesn't know.
So it had never registered.
Never registered with her.
And did you ever have occasion to discuss it with her?
I don't think she ever wanted to. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have long relationships, and she's met several people I've lived with. I remember when I first came here, I lived with somebody, and I took them to my parents' anniversary party, and she was convinced they were the driver. She never quite grasped that we were together.
Or maybe it was how she preferred to look at things.
Which is fine.
It's hard to know. You know, I've always been struck by the fact that you know, you are so comfortable and natural with who you are. Even out people are often uncomfortable with that, but with you, you wear it so much as a part of your personality and your being. Has it always been like that, or has this been an evolution for you over the years?
I've never felt I had a choice. This is what it is, and you know, I was lucky enough when I was very young to meet a group of actors, and they affected my life because I was accepted. So, you know, it wasn't a big decision. I think I was just very lucky in the people I met in my mid to late teens.
That is fortunate. And did you think at that point there might be a place for you with acting, with entertaining, and that was something you aspired to?
Well, I wanted to be a film star.
Okay.
I wanted to be successful, rich, adored, and get laid a lot. I mean, that was, you know,
Sure.
But the market for pear-shaped English Jewish queens was limited. It was a small market. A small
than,
market.
say, Cary Grant.
Yes, I never did like him for that reason. But, and I was lucky enough to meet a man called Raymond Marriott, who was a critic. And we became friends. And he said one day to me, because I was surrounded, I lived with an actor and knew these wonderful actors.
And how old were you at this point, do you think?
17.
Okay.
And
still very young.
yeah, he said to me, Barry, are you willing to be an artist who fails? Or would you rather be a businessman who understands them and protects them? And it was like my life came into focus.
I wonder how he came to that,
No idea.
you know,
I mean,
fork in the road for you.
I owe him so much. And
So did a bell go off at that point and you said, this is probably the direction I should go given who I am and given what I am?
It seemed so natural. It was, you know, a duck to water.
So what did you do next? How did that?
I lived with an actor called Tony Beckley, who
Sure.
was quite well known in England, particularly in theatre. And his best friend was Sheila Hancock, who is now Dame Sheila Hancock, who's still working and a brilliant actress.
Yes.
And we used to play, a group of us spin the bottle, and whoever the bottle pointed at, I would try and make a phone call and get a job for. And that's literally how it started. And then I got my first office, which was a room probably 6 feet by 8 feet. And
In London?
In London.
Okay.
In Clarges Street. And I was lucky enough to have a wonderful assistant called Carol Martin, who was an amateur actress, who had these 4 voices. So when people phoned, she would answer the phone in one voice and say, could you hold on? I'll put you through to the accounts department. Had an Irish voice for that.
Oh, how funny.
So people thought I had a staff.
Right.
And it was just the 2 of us.
Was this something that you came up with together?
Oh, she just did it one day. One did it, and then people...
It flowed naturally, and
naturally.
it gave her a chance to be an actress.
That's exactly it.
How funny.
Yeah, so that was fun.
So you looked like a semi-big deal
Oh, really
at
big
that
deal.
point. And how did you get clients? How did the practice and the business begin to go?
People like Hancock, Tony, I think John Thor, who became famous in America, Inspector Morse, of course.
Yes.
All of them, most of them were out of work most of the time, or in rep in places like Bromley. And I got to know them, and I was pushy.
Now, were you an agent at that point or a manager? Or was it ambiguous?
It was
as to what you
ambiguous.
were?
Legally, I was an agent, but I always called myself a manager because I decided, and I've never had more than 24 clients. I came up with this 24 hours a day, never more than 24 clients. So I've stuck to that. And you know, with the big agencies, the wonderful agencies like William Morris, etc., in England that had hundreds or if not thousands of clients, I never had more than 24.
How would you describe the difference between an agent and a manager in terms of what they do and what their roles are for someone? What's different about that?
Well, in California, there's a legal difference. I believe the term is an agent's job is to procure and negotiate work. A manager's job is to advise and counsel. There are brilliant agents that can sustain careers. There are very good managers that are able to negotiate, of course, now. But basically, the combination of the more personal details, and I've always tried to look ahead for the client. Not what they're doing today, what this job will do. Is it better to do a film and get $100,000 so I'll earn my 10? Or is it really better to do a play at the taper, which many directors, producers and casting people will see, and that will change the career.
Do I have it correctly that in California, a manager can be a producer, but an agent technically should not? Is that...
The lines are so blurred at the moment with, you know, some of the bigger agencies getting involved in production through financing.
Yes.
And, you know, it's a dangerous element to a degree if you're a manager and you produce for your clients.
Yeah, I can see that.
The obvious danger is if it fails, is it your fault? Because you produced a film that failed.
Of course it is.
Yes. And the other one is, where does your responsibility go? If you make a film for a studio, the studio's paying me as a producer. Well, my job is to say, hey, don't worry about the script, you can make it funny. And that's a great leading lady, and we've got a really hot director.
Right.
As a manager, my job might be to say, you know, if it isn't funny on the page, it's very difficult to do great comedy if it isn't there, if you act being funny. And that leading lady, they had a contract with, or the director, they had a pay or play with, they're moving him into another film, from another film. Yep. And it's the same as, you know, you come, they want to cut out your big scene. As a producer, don't worry. As a manager, I fight for it. So my obligation is different.
It's hard to know which side you're on,
absolutely.
and there are conflicts associated with it. Starting out, were you involved with a diverse group of artists in different fields, or did they tend to be primarily actors? Because I know in more recent years, you've represented actors, writers, musicians, and others.
It started out with actors, but very quickly I represented a brilliant actress called Jill Bennett, who was married to John Osborne, the playwright.
Yes.
And so then John asked me to represent him. At the same time, I met Cat Stevens, and at the same time Angela Lansbury. So one had, and I worked for a very brief moment with a photographer called David Bailey.
Sure. Now, is this in London that you started out?
This was in London, yes.
Okay, so you're still in London.
Still in London.
And you're beginning to build up a really interesting clientele. Of course, at that point, these people weren't as famous as they are today, but that was, they were getting there.
Angela was famous on Broadway. It was before Murder, She Wrote, which made her a different sort of star.
Right.
Osborne was one of the most established, probably one of the 2 or 3 greatest playwrights of the last century. Cat Stevens had begun to break here. Peter Finch hadn't made network yet. So they were building, but...
They were on their way, and your challenge was to help them do that at that point. So someone like Angela Lansbury, how did that relationship start for you, and how did it develop?
She's an astonishing actress. When I was with her, the biggest thing she did was the revival of Gypsy. But it was an interesting arrangement for certain personal reasons. She had a home in Ireland, and I was asked if I would represent her for, I think it was about 3 or 4 years. Okay. When her husband had other things to do, who was the real manager. So I took over that, and it started wonderfully. She did Gypsy in London, which she was extraordinary in. And we knew it was, you know, it had a stop date.
What was she like in those days?
She's very charming, and sometimes you forget how fiercely talented she is. And she takes her work staggeringly seriously. I mean, watching her rehearse Rose was one of the most interesting things I've ever done.
Cat Stevens, what an interesting career he has had. and what developments have occurred for him. How did that come about, and how did you guide him?
I was introduced to him by our mutual lawyer, a gentleman called Oscar Buselink, and I think he wanted to not be, at that time, he wanted to be an actor, not a songwriter. And he'd had Matthew and Son had come out.
Yes.
And we met, and we started talking about music, and we started talking about different aspects of music. And we thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if he wrote a musical, stage musical? And one of the first things I tried to get him to do was write a musical called Revolution, based on the Russian Revolution, that all took place in the kitchens of the palaces. And we never got it off the ground. It was never, except one song came out of it, which is Father and Son, which is one of his great songs.
Yeah, that's a classic.
And from then on, we had great times. And
would you have anticipated his conversion to Islam and the direction he went? Is that something that would have made sense to you, knowing him early on, that's what would happen?
He always wanted to belong. Fame never sat comfortably on him. I think he was always a spiritual person, but I think the music business tried to knock that out of him.
Well,
and,
I think it does that to most folks.
A lot of people.
It takes the soul.
Yeah. And I don't think he enjoyed his success as much as most people would have enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I think he loved performing, but above all, he liked composing.
John Osborne. Mm-hmm. How did that develop, and what has been your experience with him?
John was arguing with his wife Jill about a play and said, "Here, let that little puff read it and see what he thinks," meaning me.
Sure.
I read it and I said, I think it was one of the most boring things I'd ever read, and I told him. And he roared with laughter and said, "I need you to work with me."
Oh, how funny.
And we got on great well. I think I worked with him for about 14 years. And
that's a long run.
It was a long run. And I got to respect his work colossally. And he taught me a great deal about theatre. It was a wonderful experience when a play of his was being mounted in New York, and the director asked if some of the dialogue could be changed. And he sent me to New York with the instructions to tell them that if they were playing Beethoven's string quartets, they wouldn't change the notes. So don't change his words.
So he
considered
himself the equivalent.
He definitely considered himself the equivalent.
Well, I'm glad he wasn't a shrinking violet about such things, but he was, one of the greats of his era, certainly.
Well, he changed theatre. I mean, the angry young man looked back in anger.
Oh, yeah.
And then The Entertainer, and of course he won an Oscar for the movie of Tom Jones.
Some of the best.
Yeah.
Really. I watched Tom Jones the other night, and I know when I saw it as a young person, I was astounded by it. It was so different from anything I had seen, and so lively and everything. Today you see more things like it, but it was new for its time, certainly.
Tony Richardson was a wonderful director, and they had a great collaboration. I found out recently that in some of the contracts, film contracts I did with John, my lack of education really paid off for him, because I didn't know what in perpetuity meant at the time. And this was 30 years ago.
Sure.
So in the contracts, when they wanted the rights in perpetuity, I crossed it out and put 30 years. So all the rights have reverted back to the estate now.
Well,
which is
brilliant.
Yeah, I based a career out of that sort of brilliance.
Now, at what point did you make your way to the United States, and how did that come about?
I think I always wanted to be an American. I loved American theater, American music, American guys. I mean, it was my fantasy to live here. And Stevens was working here, Finch was working here, Osborne's play. It seemed an inevitable step. And Dusty Springfield, of course, who I represented, was living here. So I used to come here all the time. And then one day, I thought, I've got to have the courage to come here.
He really became an American-based manager, producer at that point. Yeah. Tell me about Peter Finch and his mercurial presence.
If Peter is listening, he won't mind me saying Peter could drink. He was a great drinker.
He was one of the best.
One of the best. And when he drank a lot...
In a tradition of great drinking actors.
Great drinking actors. He would everything he said he would turn into like Shakespearean talk, which was hysterical.
I see.
When I read the script of Network, of course, Howard Beale is written for an American. It was Walter Cronkite. And I believe Bill Holden was actually offered the part first, but for some reason wanted to play the other part. And they hadn't cast it. And we monitored that. And I remember driving with Sidney Lumet, and I didn't know Paddy Chayefsky, nagging the producer. And one day they agreed to meet Peter Finch. So I ring him, and he's living in Jamaica.
Okay.
And I say, Peter, they'll meet you if you can next Wednesday come to New York. And he said, they want me to audition? I said, well, it's a meeting. He said, it's a bloody audition. And he slammed the phone down on me. I was sort of mortified because I'd upset him. And
right.
What do I say now? But 5 minutes later, the phone goes, Finchy here. Sorry, I forgot I was an actor.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah. So I agreed to go to New York with him. He arrived there, stayed at the Plaza, and decided this is silly. I've got to go out.
Right. It's New York.
It's New York. So he went for a walk in Central Park, crossed over Central Park South, I guess, walking in the park, and a man knocks into him, and his wallet is gone. And Peter, he said, I had this moment, and I thought, am I allowed to swear on this program? Fuck this. Ran after the man, grabbed him and said, give me the wallet. And the man gave him the wallet, and Peter rushed back to the Plaza, locked the door, put the chain on the door,
right.
Put the wallet down next to his own wallet. He'd mugged somebody. He'd never
mugged someone.
He'd never taken the wallet out. So that was fun, getting the wallet back to the person.
That's classic.
Yeah, that's my great.
And did he make an effort to get it?
Oh yes, we
back?
got it back.
Well,
yeah.
he had a New York experience, didn't he?
Yeah.
Very early on. Mm-hmm. So I take it the meeting went well, and he got the part. Was it bumpy, or was it natural and straight after that?
Completely natural and straight. In fact, the producers and I think it was United Artists were very generous because he died, after it came out.
Right.
And they were very generous. He had a deferred payment, which they immediately paid to his family. Mm-hmm. So they were very good. And then, of course, he won the Oscar for it.
And in one of the great performances of all time. If you're going to look at great performances, that's right up there. Yeah. I think what an amazing thing that was. One person who you've been close to is Elizabeth Montgomery. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? How did you meet her, and how did that develop?
Bill Bast and Paul Hewson, who wrote some of her best movies, I knew from London, and they introduced me. First time was at a restaurant called L'Orangerie. We had dinner, and Lizzie and I both behaved fairly badly at that dinner, so we got on. And
so were you making jokes?
Oh yes, at everybody's expense. Fairly blue jokes, yes. And Lizzie was I'm not, but Lizzie was a great drinker. Again, a little like Finch could drink most people under the table and be ready for a close-up at 7 o'clock the next morning. It never affected her in any way.
You were involved in the production of a couple of her TV movies.
She really got me into production here. I think Lizzie was probably the highest paid woman on television at this point, but she had no say. In other words, who the leading man was, what the director was, when the first act break would come. And we started work, we did a 6-picture deal with CBS. And she said, Barry, why don't you produce it? At least somebody can be there for me, with a voice for me. And that's how I started producing. And I ended up, I think, produced about 12, 14 of her movies.
Yes.
And
it's a long list.
Yeah. But I mean, it was really defending and protecting rather than really producing.
Well, and that frankly is a defined role. And on some level, it removes the conflict one might feel. Yeah. You were an advocate. It's
much easier, that combination of manager, producer, client in television, because the network does try to control every aspect of it.
So she'd had a big success with Bewitched, and then was, rather regularly in movies.
Yes, I believe Case of Rape for many years was the highest viewed movie ever made for television. I don't know where it stands now, but for many years
it was a big deal.
It was a major deal.
Did you work with her when she was on Bewitched?
No. In fact, I'd never seen Bewitched when I met her.
Okay.
Yeah. But Case of Rape is quite interesting because the lady gets raped twice. I don't know if you ever saw it.
I've not seen this
She
movie.
gets raped, the man gets acquitted, because of course it was her fault, and he rapes her again. And
I have seen this movie. I remember it now.
And the network wanted to cut out the second rape. So Lizzie, great.
They had a 2-rape rule.
Yes, one rape rule. It can't be raped twice. So Lizzie, I couldn't understand, compiled a list of other leading actresses, checked their availability, and went in to the head of the network and said, I'm leaving, these are your choices. I've checked all these actresses that are available for you. Cut out the second rape, I'm out. So they kept it in, and she got away.
Well, and it was the right choice.
Right choice, of course, the right choice, yes.
For the movie. So you were doing a lot of TV production at that point. Did you find that time-consuming? Were you able to juggle the management responsibilities and the production responsibilities, or was it too much?
It was never too much, because I really do believe the more you do, the more you can do. I just go mad when I haven't got enough to do.
Right.
Then
and you're a hard worker. You show up all the time.
Yeah, well, it's something to do. It keeps you off the streets, or on the streets, whichever way you want it.
Yes. And you also have had a long-standing relationship with Joan and Jackie Collins.
Yes.
And how did that begin, and how has that developed?
Jackie
and I know they're good friends.
Yeah,
as well.
Jackie is one of my closest friends. Somebody else asked us this recently. We've no idea how it evolved. It's been going on for about 25 years. We see one another regularly. She's a great lady, and I love her daughters, and she's got a great family. And yeah, I love her books. I mean, you know, I can't wait to read the new one. What, 26, 27 books, and she's sold over 400 million.
Was she an established writer when you first met her?
Yeah.
Has she ever talked to you about how she got started writing? Was that something that she always aspired to, or is this something that came on later on?
I think she always wanted to do it from when she was very young. She's a very beautiful young lady, as Joan was, of course. Joan came here first and became a movie star. Jackie came over, and I think she felt there was another avenue for her to take, and it was writing. And I think, I may be wrong, I think the first book was The Stud, the second one, The Bitch, both made into films. And
yes,
both international,
starring her sister.
International bestsellers, you know, the books were.
Yeah. Well, and I'm embarrassed to say I've seen both the movies as well, and read both the books. So I think it says more about me than...
Well, as long as you paid for them and didn't get them out of a library, you'd be delighted.
I think actually I did pay for all of them. At least I paid for cable
Good.
in the event when they were on. In 1979, you were involved in the production of a movie, When a Stranger Calls. How did that come about?
Fred Walton and Steve Fecky, Fred Walton being the director, they both wrote it, had made a short. I don't know if you saw the film. The short was the babysitter, somebody, have you checked the children, the phone calls, an ending when she gets out of the house. And the short was terrifying, and they discussed making it into a full-length film. It could be a movie. And I was lucky enough to have met a gentleman called Melvin Simon, and I had a very hilarious relationship with him.
Is he the shopping center
guy?
Mogul? Yeah, one of the most successful real estate investors in the country.
He and his wife Brenda, really, they were so generous and so nice to me. But the lawyer at Kaplan Livingston, I think it was, rang me and said, Barry, you haven't responded to our phone call about Mel Simon. And I said, you know, the truth is I'm working hard, and nobody rich has ever given me anything. And normally what happens, I go out to dinner with rich people. I pay for it because I don't want them to think I'm after their money.
Right.
And so they told Mel that, and he grumbly said, I'll meet him, and we can go pay for our own meals or something like that. So he came to the house when I lived on St. Ives Drive, and he was wearing a sort of pinkish polyester suit. He came with a businessman and the businessman's lady friend. And he looks around. I forgot. And I was living with my friend at the time. And he says, there's only one bedroom. Are you queer? I said, you're asking me? You're wearing a pink suit.
That's very funny.
And in those days, queer wasn't quite the correct adjective to use. And I said, Mel.
And the person wearing a pink suit should not be saying that.
And I realized that every time you say queer, I want $500 for the gay lesbian community center. That night I got a check for $2,500 for the center or whatever it was, and we became great friends. And we talked about one of Strachey calls, and he just financed it.
And that was Carol Kane and Charles
Durning and Colleen Dewhurst.
Ah.
And Tony Beckley, who is the guy I met when I was a kid and lived with and taught me how to read.
Well, it's a terrific film.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's iconic. And it still resonates with people. Still one of the best of that genre. You know, another film you did that I think is underrated, although it's flawed in places, but better than people think, is American Dreamer.
Yeah.
I actually kind of like that film. I enjoy it. How did that come about?
Anne Biderman, who was then with Roger Vadim, we had dinner with, and she told us the story. And I thought, what a great film. And Doug Chapin, my partner then, and she wrote it, and then CBS Films agreed to make it. And then we were lucky enough to get Jo Beth Williams and Tom Conti and Giancarlo Giannini and Coral Brown.
Jo Beth Williams and Tom Conti, I think, are very good in this.
They're really
movie,
fun.
And a lot of fun. And we don't see as much of them now as I would like to. You know, they still look pretty good, and I've seen them in movies every so often. I wish they worked more, because they certainly were good in that.
Jo Beth is a stunning lady. She's beginning to direct, which she loves doing. So I think she, though she'll always act, I think she's enjoying it being behind the camera now for a time.
Now, Liza Minnelli has been a friend of yours for many years. How did you meet her, and how did that?
I met Liza for the first time when she came to London, and she was represented by a lady called Stevie Phillips.
Sure.
And I gave them a lift. It was raining. They came out of a restaurant. I saw Stevie. I didn't know Liza at the time. And they were talking about 3 gigs in London. So I said, why didn't she tour London? She said, what do you mean? I said, play the Albert Hall, the Festival Hall, and the Palladium.
Well.
And that's what they ended up doing. I got invited to the shows, met her then. And then after What's Love Got to Do With It came out, Liza called me, and I went to Vegas to meet her. And she terrified me that night because I arrived early. Firstly, I was sat in the very front. I'm here, the stage is there. And normally you sit a little way back.
Sure.
And then Gary Labriola, her great tour manager, came and said, Miss Minnelli would like to see you. And before she goes on, I go back, chat to Liza, and there's a 30 minutes, and then we're talking, and then 15 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and I keep saying, well, I'd better go. No, stay. In the end, the overture begins. I'm still talking to her.
My goodness.
And she takes a drag of a cigarette, walks to the side of the stage, says, see you later, and walks on stage.
And off she goes.
Off she goes. I mean, she's extraordinary. I mean, the time she has no fear at all is when she's performing. And that's, I think, what makes her one of the greatest performers.
But like many performers, maybe a little fearful in between.
In between, yeah.
It seems.
We had several good years working together. It was great fun.
Michael York has been a friend of yours.
Golly, Michael, I seem to have known all my life. I remember the first time I met him. He was physically one of the most beautiful objects anyone's ever seen on Earth. I think he was about 19.
Yes.
And, you know, astonishing.
At that point, he was one of the most handsome men in the world.
I mean, it was astonishing. And he's
still good looking.
He's still amazingly I'm a handsome guy. And we worked together for a very short time. It didn't work, but, you know, he's somebody I admire.
But he's continued to be a friend.
A friend, and he has
forever.
Great integrity.
No. And you mentioned Dusty Springfield earlier, and I've always loved her music.
Dusty, firstly, Dusty in Memphis is one of the best female albums ever made. I mean, in my opinion. And I can't remember how I met her. The first time I saw her was in cabaret at the Plaza in New York. There was a cabaret room that I forget the name of.
Sure.
And we met, started knocking around. And where she completely confused me, I believe she did find a great use for drugs. Is that a polite thing to say?
Yeah.
And I had no idea when she was stoned or not. I remember going out with her, and afterwards she would told me, didn't you know? And I said, no, and I really didn't.
No.
And then
Some people are like that. You just
I
don't
really,
know.
I mean,
Particularly if you're not part of that world.
yeah. And I sort of helped. I hate it when representatives say, we've performed here. You know, they perform without me, they act without me, they exist. You know, I helped her.
I understand your point.
Come back in London when she played the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And there was a great party for her. She got this extraordinary reception. And of course, it took her 3 hours to get to the party, so everybody had gone by the time she arrived.
Dear.
Yes, you know, but typical Dusty, but she's a great lady.
Well, and you've also worked with Diane Carroll and Dionne Warwick, two other great singers. And how did that come about?
I believe I met Diane Carroll through Sydney and Joanna Poitier, because we all lived in the same apartment complex.
Okay.
So I met her, and there was a
Here in Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles, yes.
Los Angeles,
in Los Angeles. I had met her once. I'd shaken hands with her, and of course I'd seen her in London. And we worked. She's a legend. She's extraordinary, and still vibrant, still beautiful, and still working. She's quite extraordinary.
Sidney Poitier has been a friend of yours. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, I've known his wife. I think they've been married 38 years, and I've known Joanna longer than Sidney, I'm proud to say. So, look, he still intimidates me. He makes me laugh. He's iconic and sort of, you know, I'm always aware when I'm in his presence. And he and his family, I feel, you know, thrilled to be on the edge of their lives.
What an icon. And I've read, you know, both his two books and also books that have been written about him, including one recently by Walter Mirisch, who talked about, you know, the courage that he showed in the films he did, and, you know, working in the South and all those sorts of things. He was very early on in those sorts of things. So what an exemplary person.
It's fascinating when you go out with him. We were in San Francisco, and we've all been out with well-known people. The way people respond to him, they're never pushy. It's always, excuse me, would you mind? They ask for autographs in the most polite way.
Yes.
It's fascinating to watch people's reactions to him.
You mentioned the movie, What's Love Got to Do with It? That's with Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne. How did that happen?
I think the genesis was we were in a restaurant, Doug Chapin and I, with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was then, and his wife, who was then at Disney. And some people came by and said hello in the music. And they somehow mentioned that I'd introduced them as a kid to Tina Turner. And then Jeffrey started talking about he wanted to do the movie. And the truth was how to make the movie not like a movie of the week, how to break it at those bounds beyond it, and how to do something really was inspired by this woman's talent, her courage, and how there was almost this young girl built up to a star. It's like a crucifixion and then a resurrection. And it was a fascinating thing to work on. I must say, I think my partner then, Doug Chapin, his contribution to it can't be underestimated.
Well, and it probably is one of the best, certainly musical biographies ever done. It's right up there, both in terms of the story and the intensity of it and the emotion of it. You worked on Jackie's Back.
Yep, Jennifer Lewis.
Yes. What was that like?
Hilarious.
Was it?
I think it was almost the first comedy Lifetime ever did. Probably the last. Mark Brown, and forgive me, I forget the name, I've dried on the name of his writing partner, and Jennifer came with the idea. And as you know, it was a story of a comeback and somebody making a documentary of the comeback of Jackie Washington, a singer.
Yes.
And we wanted it peppered with star cameos.
Right.
So we went to Lifetime through Hearst, and we made a list of the people we thought we could get. And we said, if we can get 6 of them, can we make the film? And we, you know, because there were 24 names on the list. providing we could get 6, because it needed to start. And Robert Townsend was obviously the director.
Yep.
And we got more than the 6. I think we got almost everybody, you know, from, oh God, Bette Midler to Whoopi Goldberg.
Well, it has almost a perfect cameo cast for this sort of picture and the over-the-top story you were trying to tell. Recently, you've helped us by producing, by us I mean here, by producing the Strachey series.
Mm-hmm.
Your series, you initiated it. It's a series of movies, and I have to say, among the things that Paul and I have worked on, it's some of the movies that I'm the proudest of in terms of how they were executed. Do you recall how that came about and how you managed to put that in place?
It had a little bit of a roundabout, because I tried to get the rights of a writer called George Baxt, who I think wrote in the 50s or 60s gay detective stories. I may have my year wrong, and I could never trace them. But I remember, as you know, when I learned to read, I started reading them, and then I found one of these novels. I think somebody sent it to me, and brought it in, and the author, who lives back east, was contacted, and that's how it evolved. And I must say, Paul. Forgive me, Chad, I didn't think Chad Allen was the right casting at all.
Right.
And Paul really believed he was, and Paul was completely right and I was completely wrong. Chad's quite brilliant in it now.
He really does an excellent
job.
And he's a lovely, lovely person, and has been so supportive of the series and you know, the work that Paul Collishman and I do. He's been terrific throughout the whole thing, and we'd like to do some more of these, because
I hope you do.
They're very good stories. I think it's one of the first times that you see a gay detective where his gayness is not necessarily what the story is about. It is important to each story, but he can be anyone. And it's about, you know, fear and heroism and all the things that go into making a complete person. He just happens to be gay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey. I'm sorry.
What? Oh my God!
It's nothing. Don't worry.
Donald!
It barely hit me. Nothing that a couple of drinks isn't gonna fix, all right?
Should I ask you about it?
No. Said I have to tell you about it, and I don't want to talk about it right now.
Well, then we won't talk about it. Who's that?
That's Kyle Griffin, my lieutenant. The first man I ever loved.
You never mentioned it before?
Yeah. He saved my life. We got caught in a ambush, snipers, and I got hit.
Right, the scar on your back.
Yeah. Kyle came running back for me. He won the Medal of Honor for that. He's a hero.
You two were a couple?
It's one of the interesting things about working, being able to do films like that for here. When I was brought up, probably every piece of music, a love song, pop music, was a boy and a girl.
Yes.
Most films were boys and girls. most literature was that. And if they did have a gay character, he either got stoned or committed suicide.
Right. He was a tragic
always
figure, or a
tragic.
silly figure.
Yeah, he could be the, you know, the court jester.
Yes.
You know, sort of, and this enables, and I think it's one of the things HERE does as a network, enables the good, the all right, the bad even side of humanity to come up, and we're all part of it.
It really is the case. Jumping around a little bit, a writer that you've had a lot of success helping recently is Michael Scott. What has he been working on recently, and what is that relationship like?
I met Michael 4 years ago when he told me he'd written 106 books. Which
okay.
I had to confess is I thought it was more than I've ever read.
It seems like a lot.
Yes, I think it's more than most people in Hollywood have read, actually.
I think that's right.
And he said, I want to tell you a story. This is, quotes, true. There was a man called Nicholas Flamel, lived in Paris in the 14th century, was a bookseller, leaves Paris, comes back as one of the richest men in France. The street his house is on is now called the Rue de Flamel. There's a street named after his wife. But he was meant to be an alchemist with the secret of eternal life. And he died. X years later, the tomb is broken into and it's empty. So the legend in Paris or France of Nicholas Flamel is a very solid legend. And I said, that's interesting, Michael, but I can't sell it.
Yeah.
And he said, no. Think San Francisco today, twins, boy and girl, about 17. He's working in a bookstore. She's waiting for her brother. And in the bookstore, there's a book in a case, and some goons come in and try and tear it, get it out of the case. They get a couple of pages, there's screaming, they run, and from the basement comes a good-looking 45-year-old guy. It's Nicholas Flamel.
Still around after all these years.
Then we go into a series, I'm sure Michael wouldn't like me saying this, almost a Harry Potter-like series, but today using cell phones, computers, cars, helicopters, everything of today to get the book, because they've got the last pages of the Book of Eternal Life. And Random House picked it up as a 6-book franchise, 1 book a year for 6 years. The first 3 books have come out. They've all been New York Times bestsellers. We've sold the film rights. And we've sold it in 37 countries now.
What a nice success. And he is such a gracious man and so talented.
Yeah, he's really talented.
It must be really fun and exciting to help that and to be supportive of that.
We have a great time together. He has a great sense of humor. Well, you know you've met him. He makes me laugh a lot.
You've been very involved for years doing charitable work. That's a big part of your activities. What things in that area interest you the most? What have you tended to focus on?
Initially, from the 80s, APLA, AMFAR, Project Inform. Project Inform particularly was run by a man, or created by a man called Martin Delaney, who was the nearest thing to a saint I've ever met. He unfortunately died about a year ago.
Yes.
And it was, I think, one of the most important HIV-related organizations, because it taught caregivers, it taught doctors, it taught people with HIV or AIDS, and it also lobbied politically to get things done. So for years I was with them. Then I went on the board of UNICEF, the California chapter. And then when I became a citizen about 3 years ago, I resigned from UNICEF because I wanted to do things for UNICEF. The world is a much better place with UNICEF in it, but it doesn't do anything in America.
Yep.
So I'm now sort of regrouping and finding what I can do here now.
Well, that's a good thing to do.
Yeah. I want to really, it occurs to me the two biggest, it occurs to me the two groups that are neglected most are teenagers and old people. You know, once you're 12.
And you're both.
Oh, well, yes, mentally I'm one. And so I'd love to do something for kids. I mean, not babies, but, you know, for teens.
Sure.
I'd like to, you know, if I the Point Project is a brilliant organization. The Trevor Project is organizations like that. And
one thing I've always admired about you is the way you rather seamlessly blend your friendships and your life with your business. It's hard for one to tell the difference. They seem to be together. I can see some real positives to that. Are there some negatives to that as well?
I think my work is integrated into my life, undoubtedly. I think the negative is my job to a degree is manipulation. You know, to sell.
Sure.
Or preferably to make you want to buy rather than to sell.
Right.
There was a wonderful man in my life, Ian. And when I was a kid, I met him and I had this crush on this 55-year-old man who knew I was far too young. And I pursued him, and he said to me, "You've got a lot to learn, Krost." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, I'll have an affair with you for 3 months." And I said, "3 months?" He said, "Yes, but we're going to spread it over 18 months. I'll see you once, maybe twice a week. You go out, play, find out what's out there for you, but I'll be here." And for 18 months, I used to see Ian once, twice a week.
Sure.
And I learned from him, and I'd come back and say, "I did this and I this, or this was said to me." And he taught me. And the end of 18 months, he took me to dinner, and we spent our last night together, and we embraced. That was it. It was one of the best relationships I've ever had, because it taught me more than... he allowed me to grow and stumble, and there was somebody I could go when I messed up.
That's actually a really good plan. I think I'd like to adopt that plan myself.
Okay. I want a percentage.
You've authored something that can be quite useful, I think. You've been involved in so many things with so many different people. For a young person who is interested in doing some of the things you have done, what sorts of thoughts or counsel would you give them?
I think there is a lot to learn in the history of the aspect of the business you want to go into. And strangely enough, I think there are some people in their early 20s that are just naturally float and are going to be brilliant in this business. There are people even older than me that are still bloody arseholes. They don't know what the hell they're doing, and they've just hit lucky. Age in this business isn't the criterion. If I'd, for the last 40 years, been an accountant or a dentist, I would be this good. I might not be the best, but I would have reached a certain level.
Sure.
But in my business, it's year by year. It goes like this.
Yes.
But studying, if it's film, knowing the history of film, knowing the people, reading scripts. I mean, it amazes me the amount of people that want to work in the business that don't read a script. It amazes me the people that want to be writers that don't write every day.
Yes.
Now, you know, I've worked as a waiter. You still can write every day, whether it's an hour a day, 2 hours a day, or whatever it is. If you're a writer, you write complete. The thing that terrifies me if people say, "Well, it's not ready, I'm a perfectionist." I promise you, it's not going to be perfect.
Right.
If it were, by the way, it'd probably be unmemorable anyway, because it would only be your vision. It wouldn't have room. No. It's the mistakes that allow me to feel, and they allow me to get involved. But it is just committing in more than the social way. Learning. We can learn from the past, and that doesn't make us old-fashioned. Selling. The internet is really just another way of when the circus came into town. It's still the same form of selling.
Yes.
Because you get one person, it's grassroots that tells 2, that tells 4, that tells 8. Does that make any sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's a very apt way of putting it, and I've never quite heard it said that way. I think it's very insightful. Yeah. You know, when people come to me and they say, "Well, I really want to do this," whether it be entertainment or to be a lawyer or to be, as you point out, some other field, what I say to them is become a craftsman. Become really, really good. Try to learn as much as you can. Doesn't mean you need to know everything, but you need to really put in the time and master your craft, whatever aspect there is of it.
You said a great word, craft, because acting is a craft, not an art. Occasionally actors lift it to an art level, like Olivier in The Entertainer. You know, it is a craft, and people think it's too intuitive. I mean, a young actor I work with, I saw when he was 15, waited for him to graduate from Cal Arts till he was 21. I remember meeting with him and his father, trying to talk him out of being an actor.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You know, why don't you become a designer? Why don't you, you know, set design? Why don't you do the edit? Why anything but being an actor? I couldn't, and when I knew I couldn't, I said, okay, go to Cal Arts, do the course. I'll wait 4 years to represent you, because that is all he can do. They're rare.
Well, and that's probably the only time that one should be an actor, because that is such a tough, tough job.
Well, the better the director, I've noticed, if there could be identical triplets, the director will say, that one's too happy, that one's sad, that's the neurotic one I like. It's really so little to do with acting when you get a major part in a film. It's to do with lighting, it's to do with editing, it's to do with your music cues.
And also a certain amount of randomness, that you were the one that was picked, or you were there rather than here.
At least if you're a painter, you can complete the work.
Yes.
If you're a writer or a composer, you can. As an actor, you can't.
Well, it's also true in your business and mine, of, you know, your case producing and managing, and my case producing. Everything's out of our control. I mean, we control very little. We try to manage all these variables, and particularly in today's world, you know, we live in a world of the unthinkable, where you know, things are happening that people don't expect, and you just have to be able to accept that you don't control anything.
And you have to be able to go with it. I mean, it's interesting how people don't quite accept that the political state of the nation, I don't mean Democrat, Republican, the whole mood of the nation, or if not the world now, affects what entertainment people want, what they're willing to accept.
And in ways we can't even imagine. We don't even know the pieces that are fitting together. But I think, you know, your observation is a good one, which is, you know, put in the time, try to get good at this. And I love your recommendation that one learn a little history.
And also have the courage to fail. Immediately that goes, you're in the wrong job.
In a weird way, you find your failures
Can
move you
anger
in a different way. And it's hard to see it at the time because it's so painful and so embarrassing. And you know, the loss of money, the loss of reputation, whatever. But boy, it can move you where you need to go. And I've seen it again and again.
Oh, right.
Thank you for taking this time, Barry. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. I have one thing to add. I haven't been nasty about anybody. Can I come back and have another session? I've been far too nice.
I think we'll leave you at nice.
Okay, thank you.
I think your friends.
Yeah, I'll keep
We
them
must have.
I'll keep them for another week or two.
Them,
okay,
yes.
thanks.